6 condemned prisoners stand on a Bucharest street, calmly reenacting the most audacious bank robbery the communist world had ever seen for a propaganda camera. They have been told that if the film turns out well, it might save their lives. It would not.
Welcome to the Black File. I'm the voice behind the file, and tonight we open one someone made sure stayed buried.
This is the case of the Re-Enact gang, a 1959 heist declared impossible in a total surveillance state, an armored car of the National Bank of Romania emptied in the open, and a case that historians still cannot agree was ever a robbery at all. By the time this story ends, 5 of these men will be dead, and the truth of what they really did will have slipped beyond anyone's reach.
It happened on the 28th of July, 1959. In the heart of Bucharest, an armored car belonging to the National Bank of Romania, the Banca Națională a României, was robbed. The haul, 1,600,000 lei.
At the exchange of the day, roughly $250,000. In a country blanketed by informers, under total surveillance, such a crime was considered simply impossible. The state itself did not believe a citizen could do this and vanish.
And for a time, that is exactly what happened. The money was gone, and no one was caught. The capital's most controlled streets had swallowed it whole, and the most feared security service in Eastern Europe had nothing. No suspects, no leads. And then the arrests began.
How investigators went from nothing to 6 names so quickly is itself one of the unanswered questions of this case. But the arrests came, and they sent a quiet shock through the party. 6 people were taken: Alexandru Ionid, Paul Ionid, Igor Sevianu, Monica Sevianu, Sasa Musat, and Haralambie Obedeanu. All 6 were Jewish Romanians, and several of them were not outsiders at all. They had been senior cadres within the Securitate and the Communist Party itself. These were people who had once held the regime's secrets, who had served its intelligence apparatus, who knew how the machine of surveillance was built. The thieves, if thieves they were, had been trained by the very state they were accused of robbing. Why would the regime arrest its own and then put them on display? To understand that, you have to understand the year.
The late 1950s in Romania were a time of suspicion turned inward. The men in this case had belonged to the security apparatus during its most ruthless years, and now it was turning on the very people who had helped build it. To some historians, a case that looked like ordinary crime carried the shape of an internal purge. People who knew too much, who had risen too high, who no longer fit the regime's changing face, were being removed. But the regime was not content to simply remove them. It wanted them to perform, and in 1960, it filmed the result.
In 1960, the regime forced the gang to make a film. Not a confession read into a microphone, a full reconstruction. It was theater and interrogation at once.
The accused were taken back into the streets and made to physically reenact the crime they stood accused of, step by step, for the camera. The film was called Reconstituia, Reconstruction. Picture it: men awaiting their sentence, retracing the route, miming the seizure of the money, performing their alleged crime under the eyes of the men who would decide their fate. And it was being filmed not for entertainment, but for one audience only. An audience the population would never be part of.
That audience was the party itself. Reconstituiria was never released to the public. It was never shown in cinemas, never broadcast, never offered to the people of Romania as news. Instead, it was screened privately for members of the Communist Party. This was not journalism. It was not even propaganda in the ordinary sense. It was an internal warning, a message passed among the regime's trusted few, and its meaning was unmistakable. Look what happens to those who stray, even those who once stood among us. The robbery had taken money from the bank. The film stole something else, the dignity of the accused, turned into a teaching tool for their own executioners.
They cooperated because they believed it might save them. The understanding, whispered or implied, was simple. Take part in the film, perform convincingly, help the regime tell its story, and they might earn clemency, a commuted sentence, a chance to live.
So they performed. They walked the streets, hit their marks, played themselves in the worst hours of their lives, holding to the hope that obedience would be rewarded.
That hope was a lie. For the 5 men, the verdict had been written before the first frame was shot. Whatever was promised in the making of Reconstituiria, the regime had no intention of honoring it. They finished the film believing they still had a chance. They were already dead men. On the 18th of February, 1960, 5 of the men were executed by firing squad: Alexandru and Paul Ionid, Igor Sevianu, Sasa Musat, and Haralambi Obedeanu. There was no public announcement. The executions were carried out in secret, hidden not only from the population, but from the families of the dead. Their families were never told that the men they loved had already been shot. In a state that filmed its prisoners performing their crimes for a closed-party audience, the act of killing them was the one thing kept entirely out of sight. One of the 6 did not die, and no one has ever fully explained why.
Monica Sevianu, the only woman among the accused, and a mother, had her sentence commuted to life imprisonment. She survived. In 1964, amid a broader wave of releases, she was freed. In 1970, she emigrated to Israel, leaving behind the country that had condemned her. She died in 1977.
A mother, the only woman, spared while 5 men were shot. If the verdict for the others had truly been written in advance, her commutation is the one exception that does not fit. And the reason it was granted is one more question the regime never answered. Pull on that thread, and the official story begins to come apart. And here, the story splits, because the deeper you look, the less certain the crime becomes. The case unfolded during a wave the communists called Romanianization, as suspicion quietly turned against Jewish citizens inside the party and the state. To many historians, that timing is no accident.
They read the Ionid affair not as a simple robbery, but as an anti-Semitic show trial disguised as an ordinary criminal case. 6 Jewish defendants, a spectacular accusation, a filmed humiliation, and a secret death.
In this reading, the heist is almost beside the point. The real purpose was the message, and the people chosen to carry it. It is a clean, damning theory. The trouble is, it might be wrong.
Because a second reading complicates the first, rather than replacing it.
In this version, the robbery was real, genuinely planned and carried out, yet the gang was not acting freely. They were coerced, blackmailed, perhaps set up from the start.
Some have gone further, suggesting the whole affair was a Securitate-engineered operation, a crime designed and steered by the very service that later condemned it. Insiders who knew the system, used as instruments and then discarded. And these two readings need not be rivals. An engineered operation could itself be anti-Semitic. The trouble is that both rest on fragments, and neither can be confirmed, because the records are silent. Decades on, no one can prove which is true. And yet, the story would not stay buried.
Long after the firing squad, the Ionid affair surfaced again in Romanian memory. A half-known scandal, first whispered about, then seriously examined. It later inspired Alexandru Solomon's 2004 documentary, The Great Communist Bank Robbery, and a 2014 feature film, Closer to the Moon. A case the regime tried to seal away inside a party screening room had become generations later a subject of open inquiry. The men who were forced to perform their crime for a hidden audience, the story they were made to act out in secret, was finally being told in the open, before the very public the regime had so carefully kept them from.
Yet inquiry has its limits. The records that might settle the case, the true authorship of the plan, the names behind the orders, the real reason 5 men died and 1 was spared, are sealed, scattered, or destroyed. The Securitate was meticulous in many things and selective in what it allowed to survive. So the central facts stand, hard and undeniable. A robbery on the 28th of July, 1959. 6 defendants, several of them former insiders. A film made for the party alone. 5 secret executions in February 1960. But the meaning beneath those facts, robbery, purge, or engineered fiction, has slipped beyond reach. The Securitate did not lose these answers. It chose which truths were allowed to survive.
Consider, then, what the camera actually captured in 1960. 6 people performing the worst day of their lives, told that the performance might buy them their lives. 5 of them already, in effect, condemned, believing the film might save them as they had been promised in the cold open of this story. A film made not to inform a nation, but to instruct a party. And behind it all, a truth deliberately broken into pieces, so that no one watching now could ever be certain what they were truly seeing. The cost was 5 lives and 1 exile. What remains is a question that has outlived everyone who could answer it, one of communist Romania's great unsolved mysteries. The Ionid gang reenacted their crime for the cameras.
the regime made sure the real story was the one thing never filmed. The file closes here, for now. Take care of yourselves, my friends, and I'll see you at the next case.